Stop counting calories. I know that might sound like strange advice from someone talking about metabolism, but stay with me here because the real story isn't about the numbers on a nutrition label at all. The real story is happening inside your muscle cells in a process that takes about 2 minutes to trigger, and most people have absolutely no idea it exists. Let's talk about your metabolism and specifically something called insulin-independent glucose uptake. Your metabolism is often described as simply calories burned, but that's a massive oversimplification. Your metabolism is really a complex, constantly shifting system involving your muscles, your hormones, and how efficiently your cells actually use the energy you give them. And here's the piece almost nobody talks about: how efficiently your cells absorb and use glucose, the sugar circulating in your blood after you eat, depends heavily on whether your muscles are actively contracting or sitting still. Here's what happens as this system weakens, whether from age, inactivity, or years of a sedentary lifestyle. You eat a meal, and instead of that energy getting used efficiently, more of it gets shuttled into fat storage. You feel that heavy, sluggish crash after eating, especially after carbohydrate heavy meals. Your weight creeps up slowly over the years, even though you haven't dramatically changed what you eat. Sound familiar? Most people respond to this by counting calories more obsessively, cutting portions smaller and smaller. And here's the problem with relying on that alone: calorie counting doesn't address why your body is storing energy inefficiently in the first place. You can eat the exact same meal on 2 different days and store dramatically different amounts of it as fat, depending on what your muscles were doing in the hour before and after you ate. That's not something a calorie count on a label can tell you. Okay, here's the good news. There's a specific short habit, just 2 minutes, that directly triggers a completely separate pathway for pulling glucose out of your bloodstream, one that doesn't even require insulin to work. Ready? Let's get into it. The key concept here is something called GLUT4 translocation. Here's the analogy I like to use. Think of your muscle cells like a warehouse with a loading dock. Glucose is the delivery truck trying to unload its cargo. Normally, insulin acts like the manager who has to come open the loading dock door before any deliveries can happen. But there's a second door, a separate entrance, that opens automatically whenever your muscles are actively working, completely independent of whether the insulin manager is around or not. Here's the mechanism, step by step. GLUT4 is a transporter protein that lives inside your muscle cells, normally tucked away in internal storage vesicles. When insulin is present, it signals these transporters to move to the cell surface, where they can pull glucose in from your bloodstream. But here's the key detail: muscle contraction itself, through a completely separate signaling pathway involving something called AMPK, an energy sensing enzyme, also triggers GLUT4 to move to the cell surface, entirely independent of insulin. This means that when your muscles are actively contracting, even briefly, they can pull glucose directly out of your bloodstream without needing much insulin at all. And here's why that matters so much. Lower insulin demand for the same amount of glucose clearance means less of that glucose ends up being shuttled toward fat storage, and it means less strain on your pancreas over time, which directly ties back into long-term insulin sensitivity and metabolic health. Now, here's how this connects to metabolism weakening with age. As we become more sedentary and as muscle mass naturally declines with age if it isn't actively maintained, we lose access to more and more of this insulin-independent pathway. More of our glucose clearance ends up depending entirely on insulin, which over years contributes to insulin resistance, the same mechanism behind stubborn weight gain and visceral fat that so many people struggle with. This is where the specific 2-minute habit comes in, because brief, well-timed muscle contraction can meaningfully activate this pathway even in a very short window. Here's exactly what the habit looks like. Within about 30 minutes after eating a meal, particularly one containing carbohydrates, do 2 minutes of body weight muscle activation. This can be body weight squats, calf raises, or simply marching in place with some intensity, done continuously for that 2-minute window. The goal is genuine muscle engagement, not a leisurely stroll, though a brisk walk works as an alternative if squats aren't practical for you. Research on post-meal movement has shown that even brief bouts of muscle activity after eating can measurably reduce the resulting blood sugar spike, and by extension, reduce the amount of insulin your body needs to release to manage that same meal. My tip: set a timer on your phone for right after you finish eating. Since this window matters, the glucose from your meal is actively entering your bloodstream during this period. And that's exactly when this insulin-independent pathway does the most good. Now, let's talk about why 2 minutes specifically and not an hour-long workout, because the distinction matters for understanding this mechanism properly. This isn't about burning a meaningful number of calories through the movement itself. 2 minutes of squats burns very few calories in the traditional sense. It's about the signaling effect. That brief contraction is enough to trigger GLUT4 translocation and meaningfully open that second glucose clearing pathway without requiring a long, sustained effort. This is genuinely good news for anyone who feels like they don't have time for exercise, because this specific mechanism doesn't require a gym session to activate. That said, this 2 minute habit works alongside longer term muscle building, not instead of it, because more total muscle mass means more total capacity for this insulin independent glucose clearance pathway across your entire day, not just in the minutes right after this specific habit. Let's talk about resistance training more broadly here, since it connects directly to this same mechanism. Building and maintaining muscle mass through regular resistance training increases your total GLUT4 transporter density across your muscle tissue over time, meaning you have more total capacity for this insulin-independent glucose clearance, even outside of the specific 2 minute post-meal window. Research has shown that people with more muscle mass generally have better overall insulin sensitivity, independent of body fat percentage. The recommendation here is at least 2 to 3 resistance training sessions weekly, hitting your major muscle groups, which complements the 2 minute post-meal habit rather than replacing it. Now, if you're finding this helpful, this is exactly the kind of thing I like covering on this channel, taking apart the real mechanisms behind metabolism, not just generic eat less, move more advice. So if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, because there's a lot more of this coming. Let's talk about a few foods that support this same system, since nutrition and this movement habit work together, not separately. Protein at each meal slows overall digestion and blunts the size of the glucose spike in the first place, meaning there's simply less glucose that needs clearing through either pathway. Aim for a palm-sized portion of protein, roughly 20 to 30 grams, at each meal. Fiber, particularly from vegetables and legumes, works similarly, slowing glucose absorption and reducing the size of the resulting spike. Building meals around a base of vegetables first is a simple, practical way to increase fiber without needing to track grams constantly. Cinnamon, specifically Ceylon cinnamon, has been shown in research to modestly improve insulin receptor sensitivity, meaning your cells respond more efficiently to whatever insulin is present, complementing rather than replacing the muscle-based pathway we've focused on today. About half a teaspoon daily is the dose most commonly used in research. Let's talk about sleep and stress too, because they tie directly back into this entire system. Poor sleep has been shown in controlled studies to reduce insulin sensitivity within just a few nights of restriction, meaning your body needs more insulin to manage the same amount of glucose, putting more strain on the exact system we've been discussing. Aiming for 7 to 8 hours consistently is a direct, measurable lever on this same pathway. Chronic stress raises cortisol, and elevated cortisol has been shown to worsen insulin resistance over time, independent of diet or exercise habits. Simple daily practices like a short walk, a few minutes of deep breathing, or consistent time outdoors have all been shown to modestly reduce cortisol and support better glucose handling as a result. Let's talk timeline, because I want to be realistic here. The blood sugar benefit from the 2 minute post-meal habit is something you can measure almost immediately. If you happen to have a glucose monitor, the difference shows up within that same meal. The longer-term metabolic benefits, improved overall insulin sensitivity, better energy stability throughout the day, tend to build over several weeks of doing this consistently after most meals, particularly larger carbohydrate-containing ones. This isn't a replacement for medical care if you have diagnosed insulin resistance, prediabetes, or diabetes. This habit works well alongside medical guidance and any prescribed treatment, not instead of it. Let me answer a few common questions. First, does this work for every meal or just carbohydrate heavy ones? It's most impactful after meals containing a meaningful amount of carbohydrate, since that's when the largest amount of glucose is entering your bloodstream and needs clearing. After a very low carbohydrate meal, the effect is less pronounced simply because there's less glucose to manage in the first place, though the habit still has some value as a general movement practice. Second, can I just do a longer walk instead of the specific 2-minute muscle activation? Yes, a brisk walk after eating works through a similar mechanism and has solid research behind it as well. The 2-minute version is specifically useful for people who feel like they genuinely don't have time or space for a longer walk, since it can be done virtually anywhere, including at a desk or in a small kitchen. Third, do I need to do this after every single meal to see benefits? Consistency matters more than perfection here. Doing this after your largest, most carbohydrate heavy meal of the day, even if you can't manage it after every meal, still provides meaningful benefit and is far better than not doing it at all. So here's the bigger picture I want you to walk away with. This was never just about calories in versus calories out. It's about a hormonal and cellular system, insulin sensitivity and glucose clearance specifically, that determines whether the energy you eat gets used efficiently or shuttled toward fat storage. And that system responds directly to whether your muscles are contracting in the window right after you eat. The 2-minute habit combined with regular resistance training, adequate protein and fiber, and good sleep and stress management all work on different pieces of that same underlying system. Combine these consistently, and you're giving your metabolism the actual conditions it needs to work efficiently, rather than fighting an uphill battle against smaller and smaller portion sizes alone. If you want to go deeper, my next video breaks down exactly how muscle mass itself changes your resting metabolic rate, and why this matters more than almost anything else as you get older. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next one.